Everybody, you're in for a treat. Randy and Carol Lee.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're modest.
it's a real treat.
Why don't we just proceed? It is recording so
Okay.
that we can post this to various Facebook pages and I know our kwvalley.info site. Carol Lee and Randy are a very powerful real estate team. And Randy happens to be the broker in the Woodcliff Lake, Pascack Valley offices for New York and New Jersey. So we're really fortunate to have both of them take the time to go through contracts. Now, can I just, and Carol Lee, I'm
Very
putting you on
kind
the
words,
spot.
Patty. I don't know if you're overplaying this.
I'm sorry?
What, Patty?
Yeah, speak up. You guys are going to have to get closer to the
Okay, yeah, we're a
computer.
little farther from the computer, so we'll
Yeah,
move
get
on.
closer. How many contracts have you successfully done so far this year? Buyer sales.
I should
That's
know.
Oh, Patty, I think we, there
I
we go.
should know my numbers by honestly buyers,
Yeah.
buyers, not sellers.
We don't know.
I don't know.
There's so many.
Dozens.
15.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot. Okay, I'm going to
But
share
we can do the class anyway.
enough to do the class. Oh, you're funny. Okay, I'm going to share.
Oh.
Yep. Okay, I did have it up.
Yes.
I did. Just give me a minute,
Technology.
guys. I do have it. You guys can talk. Just keep talking. Don't make me feel bad. There you go. I just had to find which tab. Okay.
We good
Is
to
this
go
good
then?
for you? And Randy, I co-hosted you.
Okay.
So let's start with opinion 26. You have a buyer who wants to buy a house.
Okay. Can you see us, Pat? You
Can
good?
everybody see the contract?
Okay, we'll assume we can. If anybody can't, Patty, you let us know. We'll do whatever we need to do. You know better than I do. Okay, the contract, guys. This is obviously page one. Patty, is anybody in our group tonight written out contracts already that you know of, or maybe not?
I don't know offhand.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
Well,
let's
we'll
do.
assume everybody's kind of just newer to the newly licensed. So this is page one. So we'll start at page one. Page one is, you might have heard in real estate school, if you're just out of there, it's called, used to be called the Opinion 26. It still is called Opinion 26 by the Real Estate Commission, but this is what the realtors have as the first page of the contract. It basically says who you represent. Obviously, if you're writing the contract, you're representing the buyer. Now, it does allow you to do dual agency. So you can represent the buyer usually, but if you represent both parties, meaning the buyer and seller, it's dual agency. So you can see here, if you guys can see my mouse, there's a seller, not the buyer, buyer, not the seller, and both. So you want to check one of these boxes. And that's basically all. Let's see if the screen's live. We can do on the first, what's the matter? Patty, I think I have a unmove. Oh. I don't know why that's not moving, guys. I don't know why that's not moving, guys. We may have to just talk about that first couple lines there. Just try it, Carolee. It's a static contract at the moment. That's not the one. Okay, let's see. Patty.
Do you guys have the contract on your screen?
You guys can unmute.
Yes,
if
we
you
do.
want.
Yes, we
You
do.
Okay.
And are you able to move it?
No, I think only the host and co-host can
And you
move the
know what,
slides.
Patty?
Well, it's not moving for us, but I don't know where
Hey,
Patty
Patty.
is.
Okay,
Patty's still around?
Patty can't be too far.
Yeah, she'll be back.
Here we go. Let's see. I don't know. Let's see.
So
It's not
basically,
wanting to move.
this is the notice to buyer seller. As Randy said, it's referred to as opinion 26. It basically defines what your role is if you're representing the buyer, the seller, or a dual agent representing both parties. It goes on to say, although I can't move ours down,
We'll get there.
goes on to say that you should get a lawyer to represent you, that we're not legal counsel, that we're realtors, and that we suggest that you get a lawyer to represent you in the sale. That's basically the essence of what the first page is about.
Beyond the first page, guys, and we're not getting there too quickly, but we will. you're going to need kind of name, rank, and serial number from your buyer. So obviously, working with a buyer, you'll already know their name. You may not know the full legal name that they use, if they have a middle initial, what their home address is. So you're going to have that on page 2. But we seem to be in a static standstill.
Is Patty on here
Oh,
somewhere?
you can't move it?
No, we're not able
Can you,
to move.
Pat? There we go.
Oh, there you go.
I'm sorry, I had to step away for a minute.
That's okay. We need to go to the next page
Okay,
if you don't
this
mind.
is a real contract. So this was just made out. We kind of took out the buyers and sellers names. And Patty's scrolling down. This is page 2 that you guys can see. The contract is unfortunately 13 pages. And it's a little daunting when you look at it. We'll try to go over this. Some pages are more important than others. Page 2 and 3 are the most important pages that you have to write on. And that does have the name, rank, and serial number, so to speak, of the buyer and seller and the property that you're going to work on. So you can see paragraph 1 on line 16 is for the buyer, and paragraph 25, rather line 25 is for the seller. And if you want to scroll that up a little, Pat, or so you can see it. So we went at the buyer's name. This is kind of a no-brainer stuff, guys. But when you get a little excited and write your first, second, or 100th contract, sometimes you forget which is where, or how, what goes where. So you can see property address is line 36. And this property happens to be in Woodcliff Lake. You fill out the legal information they get off the MLS sheets. If you guys have any questions, you can raise your hand or let Patty know. We'll talk slower or go back. But the lot and block number and the address are what you have here. That's right off the MLS sheet. For you guys that are not MLS members yet, you'll find it easily at the top of any listing document that's in MLS. This property is purchasing at $599, and then we break down the money. So this is most of the writing that you're going to have on this page and the next page, right, Carolee?
Correct.
So we're going to break down. There's initial deposit is blank because it's 0. Nowadays, maybe Carolee can tell you about initial deposit. It used to be we took it, but right now it's pretty traditional. We don't, right?
So
Correct.
yeah, we don't do initial deposits anymore. We used to take a $500, then $1,000, but we don't do that. We go right to the additional deposit, which is generally 10%. Now that's negotiable, but the standard is 10% of the purchase price. So when you're going to prepare a contract for your customers, you're going to have to ask them for their legal names, their current address, what the offer they want to make is, so the purchase price, and then what percent of money are they going to put down. Standard is 20% down, so that would be 10% on the additional deposit line and the other 10% at closing. So, and then the difference would be 80%, which would be the mortgage amount. It is negotiable. If you don't have somebody, sometimes people are only putting down 10%. So obviously then it would be 30,000 down as additional deposit and nothing more at closing if they're only putting 10% down total. But this is pretty much standard. We like to see, if we can, 20% down, particularly in this market, because it's more difficult to compete with less money down. And then obviously you should always double check your numbers to make sure that that equals the purchase price. And then the mortgage
We
amount.
think the math works right here, guys. So it's a 20% down deal, guys. So those numbers
Well,
add
I
to
don't know
20%.
why.
Or approximately 20%.
I don't know why one is 60 and one is 59.
One
But,
is
Because
59.
the wrote the contract just made it a round number, so it's easier to write it.
oh, okay.
That was me, by the way.
Also, the pre-approval would help the agents because it would spell out how much they're putting down. And like you said, Carolee, the additional deposit and the balance at purchase can make up that down payment that you see on the pre-approval.
That's right. And, you're going to need a pre-approval letter for your clients whenever you want to submit an offer. So when you're taking customers out, that's something you should be discussing during the process. You should be asking them, in the very beginning, actually, have you spoken to a mortgage company? Do you have a pre-approval? Because if you see a house that you love, you're going to need to have a pre-approval to present with the contract. So that's something you want to do up front, not wait until they find something they want, for a couple of reasons. A, you're prepared, and B, you want to make sure that they're looking in the correct price range. You don't want to be showing that they may think they can afford something more, but when they get their pre-approval, they may not be able to, or vice versa, they might be able to afford more than they think. So that's something you want to talk about early on in the process when you have a customer. So, and as Patty said, the pre-approval might say 20% down. It may say the mortgage amount, but it all depends. Sometimes I just had somebody who was submitting an offer in the 6s, but their pre-approval said they were approved up to 7. And they did that purposely to make them look strong because there was a lot of competition. So, just check with them about what they want to put down. It might not exactly match the pre-approval. And then on the following page, which would be page 3 of the contract, it kind of breaks down what we just spoke about. Like, so there's no initial deposit, but the additional deposit is, now in this case, Randy did it to make, again, to be competitive. He put it was due at the end of attorney review. The standard would be usually 10 days from attorney review.
But that's a nice strategy.
Yeah, if you're competing with other people or you're trying to make a deal really tight for the owner, you might want to put at the end, you could do 2 days after attorney review, 5 days, but the standard is 10. In this market, some of these standard procedures go out the window because we're normally competing against other people. So we want to tighten up the deal and make it as tight as possible so we look good against the competition. C is that basically saying that initial deposit that the buyer is putting up is going to be held in the seller's attorney's trust account. Again, that's a standard practice. The seller's attorney holds it. It is protected. The buyers don't have to worry because the contract is subject to a satisfactory home inspection and to them getting a mortgage. If either of those things do not happen, then that deposit will be returned to them. But it is held by the seller's attorney.
That makes sense, guys. Any questions, like I said, just raise your hand or tell Patty, or just yell out what your question might be, because no question is too small here, guys. So
to Carol's point about the contract, if they don't qualify for the mortgage or they can't agree on physical inspection issues, just also it takes both attorneys to release the escrow money. So that's a fail-safe for the buyer also.
Yes, that's correct. Nobody can do anything with the money without both attorneys agreeing. And generally what happens if they can't come to an agreement on a home inspection issue, the buyer's attorney would then ask for the money to be refunded to their client. So that the contract is subject to those things.
Just so you guys know, if you're new to the business, I assume most of you guys are, maybe just out of even real estate school, the buyer are always going to ask you, is my money protected, Carol Lee? And Carol Lee's going to say, yes, your money's protected. The issue that Patty just mentioned and Carol Lee about both lawyers agreeing to release money would be the deeper you go into the contract, meaning time-wise, the harder it's going to be for the people to get the money back. Once you have the home inspection, the week before the closing, a deal falls through, it's going to be kind of hard for the buyer to get their money back unless there's some really legal, legitimate reason. Home inspection issues, the buyer can get out of, I hate to say that even, but they can get out of the contract during home inspection issues if it can't be resolved. But once you get beyond the home inspection and once the people do get their mortgage and they have it in writing, remember everything in real estate has to be in writing, it becomes tougher and tougher for the people to get the money back. Like if they get cold feet right before the closing, they're going to be pretty hard pressed to be protected and get their money back. So the protection is pretty much when the transaction starts new, they enter attorney review, they have their house inspection, and they have applied for their mortgage. All those conditions have to be met. Once they're all met, it becomes really hard for the people to get their money back. Then that's when the seller's protection really kicks in. The buyer's obligated to the transaction. So if that kind of makes sense, they're protected, but they're not protected until the day before the closing, for sure. Right, Karen?
Right. They need a legitimate, there are contingencies in the contract for a reason. The home inspection is a contingency. The mortgage is a contingency. Once all the contingencies are met, then you have a fully executed contract, and it's a little more difficult to get out of the contract. So, I think they can, you can explain that to them. But oftentimes people are worried, well, the seller's attorney is going to hold my money in 10 days, and I have all these other contingencies to meet. So you can explain to them that it's safe as long as you're acting in good faith and abiding by the terms of the contract. The next paragraph is, again, just kind of a recap of the mortgage. You get that same number from the first page, $480,000 mortgage. In this case, they have 20% down, so it's a conventional loan. The term of the mortgage is 30 years.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if somebody's in this particular case, if they're pre-approved for say 700, to protect themselves, is it how would they not get a mortgage?
You mean if they have a letter that says 700, Dave?
Yeah, if they had a pre-approval up to 700.
Okay. The pre-approval is, you guys probably know, it's not a mortgage commitment. It often says in the letter that we're pre-approving you, but subject to, confirming your employment and your credit and so forth. A pre-approval is telling you in most every case that the lender's already run their credit, but they haven't verified their employment and stuff like that. So the credit's been run, assuming they have good credit, they give a pre-approval letter, but it's not a slam dunk 100% to guarantee. It's very good if you get a good lender. Most of these deals don't fall through because of a mortgage. Most of them do work out. Occasionally you find a pre-approval letter that everybody said was wonderful up front, and then 30 days later they can't get the loan.
And certain things, Dave, come up that maybe, in other words, if you go to your mortgage company and you get pre-approved, then they check your credit and they check everything, and you're self-employed, let's say, well, maybe you forgot to tell them that you have a partner, or, intentionally, unintentionally, or the appraisal could be an issue, which the buyer could be approved, but if the appraisal comes in low, they're not going to get the commitment based on the appraisal. So there's reasons. Most times we never lose a deal with a good pre-approval. Unlike a pre-qual, it used to be a pre-qualification was just based on the information that the buyer provided. With a true pre-approval, they've checked their assets, they've checked their credit, but they might find out that they've only been in business for a year and a half, and you need to be in business for 2 years in order to get the mortgage. So there's some issues that can come up, but a pre-approval is pretty solid. Most deals, if they're going to fall through, it's because of the home inspection.
Does that explain your pre-approval, Dave? Okay.
Good question, Dave.
It's not 100% guarantee, but it's pretty good. If it's a good lender. There's a lot of mortgage lenders, not necessarily banks. Some are even small lenders, but they're all legitimate. Once in a while, you have a buyer that tells them perhaps a little white lie on their application I'll be kind to them, to their lender, and the lender says, well, that's not what you told me when we pre-approved you. And that's when you run into problems. But that happens in minuscule times. I hate to say it, if you do enough transactions, you will encounter sometime a loan that doesn't come through for that reason. But it's a small percentage. I don't even know, but it's probably less than 5% of them fall through for that reason.
And I had a buyer who legitimately was pre-approved, had a commitment, and then lost their job. So they revoked the commitment. So there's always different circumstances that could happen. So, but most times you're pretty solid with a good pre-approval from the mortgage point of view.
Dave, Patty can tell you back to the pre-approval and how solid it is. In sales, you don't want to ever, I don't know if you guys have already been in a different field of sales, but you never really want to talk to your buyer or seller about like negative things that your seller may ask you, Dave, how good is this pre-approval letter? My opinion would be that the letter is pretty solid. You may even know of the lender, or somebody in your office may have heard of the lender, but if they haven't heard of the lender, it doesn't mean it's not solid. But you got to tell your owner once in a blue moon, something can go bad, but it's pretty much like a 97, 90, 99% solid when you have the pre-approval letter. But something can go wrong, and you have to tell your seller and buyer that, prep them, but never talk up too much negative stuff, because you don't want them to be feeling we're not professional, or you don't want to give the buyer indications of how to get out of a contract, or the seller make you feel like, hey, this buyer's a little skeptical, maybe we better not take them. If you have a pre-approval letter, it's pretty good to stand on, I think. If that's
especially
helpful.
When it's our mortgage partners.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good, Patty.
And sometimes when I have a listing and somebody brings me an offer and they have a pre-approval from a company that I'm unfamiliar with, I will ask them, if I could call their lender so I could speak to him and be reassured, so I can reassure my seller. But also, if it's a lender that I know nothing about, I will sometimes ask if their buyer would agree to be pre-approved by our mortgage company. They don't have to use them, but we'd like them just to be checked out so we know they're totally solid. So those are kind of things that we do to make sure that it's a solid deal.
Dave, lenders are also licensed like we are, guys. So it's not that they're just anybody off the street can be a lender. They have to sign up. They got to be approved by the state to be a lender. So, pretty much everything's legit. I hope that explains that.
Yep. Thank you.
Part of it. All right. You're welcome.
Thank you.
And then, so we're in the mortgage still. So you can see it's filled in there 30 days from review. That means they have 30 days to get the mortgage from the end of attorney review. In a case where you're competing, I just had a situation where the seller wanted a quicker mortgage commitment. We were able to get the lender to promise us that he could do it in 21. But in this climate, with as busy as they are in COVID and everything, 30 days is pretty standard for a mortgage commitment.
And check with the lender.
Yeah, most of the lenders, guys, like Patty's saying correctly, that if you have a jumbo loan, a lot of lenders are going to tell you, because there's so much refinancing going on and the market's pretty busy, it may take more than 30 days to get a jumbo loan. So it might even be 45 days. So you want to be a little careful. But if you're competing in the multiple offer situation that we're living with right now, we would usually put in what I have put in here, which is a 30-day review. You're not going to lose the deal between us, Keller Williams. If it turns out to be 35 or 36 days, if you're that deep into the transaction, no attorney is going to probably push you out, or a home seller, if you need a few more days to get the loan. So
and it's all communication.
It's communication.
And if your buyer happens to be self-employed, they may need a little longer to get the mortgage because there's much more paperwork involved.
Could I just go back up to line 76? Because agents may have questions on how to fill that out.
On the term of the loan, Patty?
Yep.
The term of the loan, almost every buyer, I don't know the percentages, but almost every buyer nowadays is going to get a 30-year loan. You sometimes, see on television or marketing products by the lenders, they're pushing for 15 because obviously the loan's paid off that much quicker. But I would say on most contracts, you're going to put a 30-day. It does give the buyer the option later on if they qualify. They can always reduce the term before the closing with their lender to 10 years, 15, 20, whatever they want. But I would say in almost every offer sheet you're going to see, like we're doing right here in the contract, you're going to use 30 days. But the buyer can go back later. That would be your answer also. If the buyer said to you, can we do a 15? We're not really sure tonight while we're making the offer. I'd say make it a 30. You always have the option to an attorney review or a couple weeks into the deal, as long as you're qualified, to get a shorter term on that. Does that answer that question, Patty? I don't go.
Thank you.
And to Patty's point, on their pre-approval, it should say 20%. They've been pre-approved for a loan with 20% down based on a purchase price of this and a 30-year loan. Or it may say 15 or 20, but always, again, check the pre-approval because you want the two to match.
Yeah, a lot of these numbers can be right off the pre-approval letter, like Patty said a little bit ago. The tricky part is, guys, when you make the offer, often you're going to have to negotiate. They're not going to take your offer right out of the box. So if this was a $599 accepted contract, if the owner came back and said they wanted $620 and we had to negotiate the price up, the mortgage amount might go up too. So you always have to remember, when you change numbers on page 2, you're going to have to go to this page 3 and make sure you change it. The big number would be the mortgage number. I'm pointing, but like you guys can see it. I don't know why. The mortgage number there on line 75, when you go, you'd have to go back to the second page and make sure your numbers match. So those 480s match. So if you go for a 500 mortgage, you'd have to go to page 3. And often people make the mistake in the excitement of negotiating and they rewrite the contract. They forget to change that. You're not going to go to, as we say, Patty says often, real estate jail for that. It can always be corrected in attorney review if you make a mistake. But
you want to keep your ratios there too. If they want to do a 20% down, make sure your final math is 20%
So as you
down.
negotiate it up, you want to make sure you want to change the mortgage. Unless your buyer says, no, Dave, I want to stay at 480. I'm just going to put 20 cash down more and go and make the price 620. So your numbers have to add up. We always double, triple check the numbers before you submit everything. Get the calculator out and actually double and triple check. It's always a good idea. Where are we, Patty?
The next item is the balance of the purchase price, which they bring to the closing, which we've already mentioned on the previous page. And then the next blank is the time of the closing. And 60 days is your average closing. 30 days to get a mortgage, generally. Then they do the title work. You can certainly close in 45, but 60 days is pretty standard.
Go ahead, Patty.
I see that you put 60 days rather than a date. Can you just explain that?
I don't want to speak for Carol Lee, but we do a lot of things. We've worked together a long time, so I assume she would probably do that too, because you don't know how quickly attorney review is going to be, guys. Attorney review in this contract, and we'll get to it a little later, does say it's 3 business days, but sometimes if an attorney's on vacation or in court, or it could be 4 days, 5 days, it could be a week. You don't really like it to be a week, or 2, but you want the attorney review to go as quickly as you can, but not knowing exactly when it's going to be over. I just put the 60 days in, Patty, because I didn't want to put a firm date that they have to change later. And Carol Lee's 100% correct that 60 days the average closing right now, because every lender out there is giving a 60-day loan commitment because the rates are so low. A buyer's going to like to lock in, and most lock-ins on mortgage rates are no more than 60 days. So
Wow.
For any of you guys that are homeowners for a while, 90 days used to be the very typical closing, not that long ago. 90 days, no problem, but 60 days has become the traditional because the lenders all commit for 60 days on the rate.
And,
all right.
And just a note about the date as opposed to 60 days. It depends when you have somebody interested, a buyer, you're representing the buyer now, interested in a property, you're always going to call the listing agent to say, do you have any offers? What kind of a closing date is the seller looking for? And if the date, as long as it's within reasonable time, if the seller says the sellers would like to close June 15th because they're moving somewhere, then you might put June 15th in the contract. So each case is a little bit different. You try to make your contract when you're making an offer as amenable to the seller's desires as you can to get it accepted.
Stuff like that Carol Lee's saying, guys, or Patty can agree that that's more like a strategy thing than how to fill in the line. So in filling out your contract, there's a lot of strategy that goes with it. It's not just so cut and dry as, take your pen or pencil and fill in the contract and then have the people sign it. It's strategy, finding out when the buyer wants to move, when the seller can move, trying to accommodate them, particularly the seller, to keep other offers at bay while you make your deal. So MLS listings, when you see them, if you're not in MLS yet, they all read like the realtor makes a choice, 0 to 30, 30 to 60, 60 to 90 days, or 120. So if they just pick one, it might not be as specific as Carol Lee's suggesting for you to find out. So for you to talk to the listing agent, like Patty said a minute ago, always communicate as best you can. That listing agent may give you some info like, hey, they're moving to the Poconos, they have a close date. If you could match it, that would really help make your deal or make it easier for you. So all that information you can glean by chatting with doing a little investigating with the listing agent mostly, and finding out and try to match it up. But that's why I have 60 days, Patty, rather than, let's say, June 15th.
Good, thank you.
All right.
All right, items included.
Any questions, guys? Don't hesitate to just scream them out because we want this to be helpful for you. That's all what we're here for.
I have a question.
Yes.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Go ahead, Ann.
So, Carol Lee, you mentioned earlier about kind of offering to do the after 2 days after attorney review's over, doing the initial or the additional deposit.
Yeah.
Is that a pretty common thing nowadays with COVID and with like the competition?
Well, as I said, 10 days was always standard, but now with the competition, and this is again getting back to strategy. Before you present an offer to a listing agent, you're going to want to have as much conversation with them as you can to say, do the sellers have a place to go, or are they still looking around? Do they need more time or less time? So, and how many are there offers on the property? How many? Like I just was in a situation, there were 7 offers on the property. So I told my buyers, we need to tighten up our deal. We may need to make the inspections 3 to 5 days after attorney review. We need to put the deposit down, 5 days after attorney review. So yes, you would use that as a strategy just to make your buyers look as strong as you possibly can when you're competing with others. If it's a normal market where there may not be multiple offers, then 10 days is the normal.
Mm-hmm.
You probably heard or already know, Ann, that most of the properties do have multiple offers right now. So you have to set this stage up with your buyers so they're agreeable. If they have to sell some stock or get the money from some other account that's, everything can be done electronically now. So they're pretty accessible unless they say I have to sell my company stock and I want to wait a week. We try to do it as a strategy thing, not so much for the real estate commission rules and regulations. The quicker the money comes in, what Carol is saying is, the stronger it makes your deal look. So it puts you in a stronger position if you're trying to fend off other offers. If you're competing with somebody who's bringing in their money in 2 weeks and you're bringing in the money in the day after attorney review, you look in the other realtor and seller's eyes a lot better. So that's why I have it in there. And I've done that lately a lot, because you just have to be competitive, but you have to set the stage with your buyer and tell them why you're doing that. It's to help them get the property, and you feel maybe that gives them a leg up over the competition. So there's all that strategy, but you need to coach your buyer on that.
And those are the kind of conversations while you're out showing houses to people, and it's always good to like follow up and say, oh, remember the 3 houses we saw, they're all gone. Like, let them know what's going on in the market. Even if they didn't like them, say, oh yeah, those houses went already. This way they see that there's a little urgency. I mean, a lot of buyers know that in this particular market, but it's a good thing to set the stage. And then, you can talk to them about, in a multiple offer situation, these are some of the ways we can make ourselves look better than the competition. We can put down 20, like I had a buyer wanted to put down 10%, and I explained to them that you're not going to look as strong as most buyers, because most sellers like to see 20% down. So they said, well, we'll write it up at 20% down. I said, if you want to go for a bigger mortgage, that's fine. But as long as if you get only an 80% mortgage, you can come up with that money. And then say to them, do you have the funds available if we want to put the additional deposit down in 3 to 5 days as opposed to 10? Can you make your home inspection for structural, environmental, and safety issues only, meaning we're not going to nitpick about a lot of little things. So you can tell them, and I always say to them, these are the things that we can do to make you more competitive. You have to do the things that you're comfortable with. Because some people, feel like, well, I'm not going to limit my home inspection. I'm too afraid, so you have to make them comfortable with the choices, but you can tell them the ways to make them stand out among the rest.
Does that kind of make sense, Ann?
Right. Yeah, that sounds like a good strategy.
All good strategy. Yeah.
And the items included and excluded, obviously on the listing, it says included, excluded items. So you copy that right from there. It does say, or you'll see an included that like shrubberies are included. If people are going to take away a cherry tree that their kids gave them for, they need to say that in the listing. So when you sit down with a seller, you're going to ask them, is there anything you're taking with you? And if they're hemming and hawing, I usually say, let's say it's excluded. You can always leave it, but you don't want to get an offer and then say, oh, by the way, we're taking 3 trees out of the front yard. So if they're not sure, always make it negotiable or excluded, and they can always throw it in the end.
It may sound funny, but we actually had some people take plantings like trees out of the property, unbeknownst to the buyer. Like the buyer goes to the walkthrough and there's a tree missing by the front walk, and they're like, well, what the heck? And that's their favorite tree. Or I can't think of the Japanese weeping
Maple,
tree.
yeah.
They're fairly expensive, like several $100s or more, depending on the size. And somebody took one, right?
Yep.
And you wouldn't think anybody would ever take a planting, but they never told the buyer. So of course the buyer did the walkthrough and they were all bummed out, and the deal didn't fall through. But nobody was happy that the owner took the planting to their new home, 5 miles away. So
You can't make it up.
Last second.
Yeah.
Now, because it's a competitive environment, guys, you don't want your buyer asking for the $10,000 outdoor kitchen that the owner's taking to his new house when there may be competing with 5 offers. So, or if there's a big screen TV, a 70-inch TV, you don't want your buyer to say, I want that included, because you shouldn't ask for a lot of included things that they're not already offering, because it weakens your deal, like Carol Lee said. It puts you in an awkward spot. So just be careful on that included, not included kind of thing. So now we'll go to that's where you do most of your writing, guys, on page 1, 2, and 3. Yeah. The other pages get a little dry and boring, but we'll go over them. I see Patty's already got his position.
They're like fill in the blank things.
Yeah, certificate of occupancy, that line number 144, I get questions on that all the time.
Okay.
A certificate of occupancy is required by the seller in order to sell their home. It's required by the town, and it's the seller's responsibility to get, unless it's a bank-owned property, which we won't get into. But the seller's responsible for it. Line 144 says, if the expense exceeds blank, then the seller doesn't have to do it. So if for instance, if you, in the past, if people have converted a garage to a family room, some towns before you sell require you to replace a garage because you took it down. So if what the town's requiring them to do exceeds $1,000, what this line is saying is they don't have to do it.
But Patty, I wouldn't be too concerned about that for everybody, because you hardly ever have anybody invoke the amount of money. It's a dollar amount to put in there. I mean, $500 or $1,000 is probably sufficient to put in. $1,000 has probably become kind of common traditional use, but probably no transaction is going to fall through because of that particular clause. So I wouldn't get too hung up on it. I would use $1,000. Most attorneys let that go through if they have any issue with it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be too concerned
and
about
the thing
worrying
is,
about it.
it's required by the town. So if they really want to sell, they're going to have to spend whatever it takes to get the CO.
Yeah. No matter what buyer it is. Yeah, the towns, not all towns require a C of O. They all require a fire inspection.
Correct.
But for those that require a certificate of occupancy, they come out and inspect, and the seller has to put it into compliance.
Right. And there are some towns that give, I haven't done one lately, but at one point I know in Glen Rock, they had a laundry list of things. They need a new front railing. They need this, they need that. And either the seller does it or they don't have a certificate of occupancy. So it's sort of,
Some towns are much tougher than others.
Yes.
So I think that should answer that one, Patty, unless you have other questions about that.
No.
And the next one just talks about municipal assessments. You're saying that the seller is representing that they've not been notified of any assessments. That's generally in a townhouse or condo situation that comes up. But, you're going to check has not been notified. And if they disagree with that, then obviously they're going to change it.
Okay. Where do you want me to go
Quality,
next?
title. That basically says that the seller represents that there's not liens and mechanic liens or other liens against the house that will not allow them to give clear title.
These are all technical stuff, mostly for the attorneys, guys, but we have to put in the contract. The buyer can never close unless there's clear title. No attorney is going to let them close. I got a little small, Patty.
What happened?
I don't know. You clicked on something.
But you want to make
keep talking. I'll get back to it.
Patty, it's the percentage. So if you just click the plus sign, it says 25%.
I don't see it.
Or Randy, at the top, it says
live.
It's not allowing us to change here.
It says you're on page. It says you're on 5 of 13, and it says 25%. So you have to just get back to 100.
Yeah, Patty, on the top of the screen, the black bar that goes across, right above the contract, it should say 25%.
You see it, Pat?
No.
Directly where your mouse is. Is that your mouse? Move your mouse, Patty.
Yeah, I'm moving it.
I don't see it. That's somebody else.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it here.
Look at the top page of the contract, Patty. Right above it, there's a black bar across the top, right?
Yeah.
And it says 5/13.
You know what? Wait a minute. There we go. You know what? I had something else in the way.
Leslie's the new tech person, by the way. So, you like it or not.
There you go.
Right.
Okay.
So back to the page where we were, Patty, which was 5, I guess.
Title.
Maybe.
So you guys get the picture. Clear title. We don't get the clear title as real estate agents.
Patty,
the attorney does.
Just go to the previous page. 1 minute. There was something you fill in that says, go up to the next page.
Tenancies? We were at tenancies.
No. And right above it, you see at line 181, it says this property is being sold as you fill in single family or condo or 2-family. And you do that because maybe it's a mother-daughter and people are thinking it's a 2-family. So you just fill in, generally 90% of the time, it's going to be single family dwelling. So I just wanted to mention that.
Okay.
Tenancies basically says that you're selling this property not subject to any tenants in the property.
But if the property's rented, guys, and you know it, you're gonna check the other box. So it alerts the attorney in attorney review to know that there's a tenant there, and they may have to put some other language in a rider. If you guys haven't written a contract, even though we do all this talking tonight, the attorneys might add a rider that might be 1 page or it could be 20 pages to the 13-page contract. Total, my opinion, I'm not an attorney. I don't know if anybody online is, but total overkill, but that's what they do. So
The next
Okay.
is lead-based paint. So everybody knows from real estate school that any house built before 1978 could have lead-based paint. So any house that you sell built before 78, you would always check applicable for the lead-based paint disclosure. And then we have a separate lead-based paint form that would go along with the contract.
That you would get from the seller.
Yes. And then you go to inspections. And this is basically, all this wording is basically saying that the buyer has the right, has X amount of days to do inspections, and the seller has X amount of days to reply to the buyer, and the seller has the right to say no or to cure the problems that the buyer is requesting. Randy filled in 3 days. He says if it's left blank, it's 3 days. Now, 3 is really very short amount of time, but again,
That's for the response,
in this
not for the
market,
inspection.
you want to be competitive and move those things along.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good explanation, guys, what Carol Lee just said of what you're going to tell your buyer when they say, Leslie, what about the inspection? How long do I have? And what am I going to do with it? What do you suggest I do with it? Carol Lee just gave a pretty good explanation of telling them how much time frame they should take to have it done, and what the seller's perhaps going to say, and what they can do. If there's deficiencies with the property, which there's almost always something the matter with the property, is it a small item that the seller's not going to do, or that your buyer's not going to ask for? Is there a big item like a foundation that's a structural problem with the house that Carol Lee mentioned before that really needs to be addressed? So it sets out the time frames, but I would just make your buyer feel comfortable that they can have the inspection. There's a time period of that they can ask for any deficiencies. But I would also say, tell them, don't bring us a long laundry list of items, because a 20-item list is not going to make the other realtor and the homeowner happy. So,
Well, again, that's about strategy and preparing the buyer. So you're going to say that no house is perfect. And even brand new houses have issues, but particularly resale houses, nothing is perfect. You're having the home inspection for the things that you cannot see. You know, electrical problems, plumbing problems, safety issues, not for the driveway that's cracked that you already knew that when you bought the house. So you're having inspections, you're buying the house as is. Every house is sold as is. It says in here somewhere. But they have the right to ask if there's repairs that need to be done. They have the right to ask the seller to do them. And the seller has the right to say no, except for the standard. Sellers generally always take care of termites, because people need a 1-year warranty in order to get a mortgage. So that's a standard thing. The sellers take care of termites. Radon is another one. Any kind of environmental issues, mold, asbestos, those are the bigger.
that's part of your home inspection, guys.
And you should also, it's not in here, but in today when you sell a house, most people are doing an oil tank sweep of the property. And that's something you want to advise your client for their own protection. It's about $250. It'll be the best money they ever spent if, God forbid, there's an underground oil tank that they were unaware of. So that's in addition to home termite radon, which are the standard, we also suggest that they do an oil tank sweep.
Okay, what's a poet?
We're good with that? Any questions? Like I said, jump right in. The other stuff coming up here, line 246 and 254, like point of entry and cesspool. These are like, Carol Lee gave you a big dissertation, a couple minutes on the house inspection, which is really important to buyers. These items are less important, and they're legalese kind of stuff that's going to be for the lawyers. And if a problem comes up, like a cesspool or with a sewer connection. I mean, this used to be big in Bergen County, where a lot of the selling you're going to do is taking place. Most of the towns now have sewers, like Wyckoff doesn't have all sewers, Altapan doesn't, but while they're in the process of installing sewers, then cesspools and septic tanks become important. But most towns already have sewers, so the cesspool situation probably not going to come up. The well in some towns,
the POET
always
system
come
is
up.
for well water, so that's an entry system. But so most times you're going to be checking not applicable, because it's mostly going to be municipal water.
Yeah.
So if you want to
Okay.
scroll up, Patty, we'll keep rolling here.
Yeah, in the interest of time. And here
Yeah,
you go.
any
Here's
Inspection contingencies. Okay, there's radon that Carol Lee mentioned. Super important. Every inspector nowadays, almost every inspector or buyer wants to have a radon inspection, a termite inspection, and a structural inspection. So these clauses cover all that stuff. There's your termite, the buyer's right to inspection, the responsibilities to cure it, in paragraph E there. That's what Carol Lee mentioned a minute ago. The buyer can have all the inspections they want at their expense, even though the house is being sold as is, because almost every owner says we want to sell the house as is, Randy, because we're not doing any repairs. But then you're going to tell them what Carol Lee just told you a moment ago, that the buyer also has rights to the inspection if the owner agrees. Buyer can have all the inspections they want, and the buyer may find there's some deficiencies in the house. They have then the right to ask the seller to correct them. The seller has the right to say, no way, Patty, are we doing any of these repairs because they're ridiculous. We're not fixing the pane of glass is cracked in the garage door and the loose doorknob to my kid's bedroom. We're not fixing those. So,
and you'll often hear buyers say, oh, this house needs all new windows. And like my answer to that would be, if the sellers didn't put new windows in for themselves, they're not going to be putting them in for you. So, I mean, yes, It needs new windows, but you can do that over time. You know, if somebody didn't fix something or upgrade something for themselves, they're not going to do it when they're selling the house. I mean, as long as they open and close and they work properly. But just because they happen to be old, they're not going to replace those things. So they just need to understand that they're doing this for informational purposes only, and to find the really big things. If there's a leak in the sewer pipe, which I just had, a piece of the pipe had to be replaced. If there's a crack in the foundation or there's any settlement, those are the big thing items that if every buyer is going to have a problem with the items, then it's smart for the sellers to address it the first go around.
Guys, a really good strategy thing, since we're probably talking 80% strategy and 20% how to fill in the blanks on the contract, is what Carol is saying. And what we're talking about is educating the buyer what the process is going to be from the first time you meet them until they finally pick a property. And you talk to them out in the front yard if they look at a house and they say, gee, it has a lot of old windows, Carol Lee, that Carol Lee just mentioned. And you're going to say, yeah, but Randy, the seller's not going to fix all new windows, because people would say, well, it needs $40,000 worth of windows, Carol Lee. She's going to say just what she said. You can't expect the seller rather, to put all new windows in, unless there's no windows in the house and the rain's pouring in. That's a different story. But I'm just making an extreme example to give you the idea. So you always want to educate your people. In the front yard, you're going to tell them what Carol Lee just said. That you can't expect, Patty, for the buyer to replace all the windows. They all operate, or we assume they operate, and they're all good. Same thing with the roof. If the roof looks older, you can't expect the seller rather, to give you a brand new roof, because a lot of buyers will stand in the front yard and say, Carol Lee, the roof looks like it really old. And they may have a disclosure form from the seller saying that, hey, we don't know how old it is, but we've lived here 25 years. Carol Lee and I just had this situation on the listing. The owner, they've been there 30 years, never replaced the roof, but it's not leaking. So the buyer came back and said, not on this property we're looking at right now, but the buyer wanted a new roof, and the owner said no. And but there was some compromise. There was another little deficiency in the house. So a deal was cut about a week ago with the buyer and seller of dollar amount. But the numbers kind of were thrown around, were 20 and 25,000, and we made the deal at a few thousand. So, but you want to set the stage for your buyer to be understanding they're not going to always get what they want, and the owner's not going to make any house new for them. They're not going to put in a new bathroom. They're not going to put in a new roof. They're not going to give you new furnace, as long as they're all working.
And the buyer gets to see the seller's disclosure, which I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's a form that the seller fills out. And our seller put that the roof was 28 years old. So when the buyer came back and asked, we said, when you made the offer, you saw the seller's disclosure and you knew the roof was 28 years old. So unless it's leaking, he's not going to replace it or fix it. And he did not. And they still bought the house. So buyers will try sometimes to give you a list of 10 items, and I like to tell them we'll pick the 3 most important and we'll do the best that we can for you to try to get the sellers to cooperate.
Does that make sense, guys?
You get the picture. I mean, you're not buying a perfect house. You're going for major things that are really important to you.
It becomes a little tough in this kind of environment, guys, where there's a lot of competition for properties, where a buyer sometimes offer a price which may be even more than the asking price to win a house, and then they use a home inspection to kind of claw back claw back some of that money. Like if they paid 20 grand over, they may feel like, wow, if we paid 20 grand over, we need to get more money back on the inspection. So they try to really leverage the inspection, but you need to educate them that that's not going to fly in most cases. So okay. I see Patty scrolling.
Back to the contract.
Yeah, I'm scrolling.
So the flood hazard zone, that you would know on the listing, it should say may require flood insurance. You occasionally will find a property that may need flood insurance that the sellers were unaware of. If you're not sure, we have a title company, Carnegie Title, that's connected to our company, and they will run a flood search for no cost for you. So that's something important to check.
Yeah, the MLS has flood maps. The only thing is they don't include the structures.
Yeah.
And of course
That's the
They're
tricky
not
part.
always
We have
ag-
one of those going on right now.
Exactly.
It's always an issue. That's a good point, Patty.
Qualifications of inspectors, that means they need to use a qualified inspector, not their Uncle John, who's going to make up a bunch of things that are wrong with the house. Megan's Law talks about the buyer
You
has
guys
the
probably
right
know what that is.
to contact the municipality to find out if there's sex offenders in the area. That's a buyer's right. Megan's Law Registry, notification of on-site conditions. That's basically just saying that the seller is disclosing if they know that anything that's going on in the area, in the
Shopping
vicinity.
mall going in and behind the
A
house. or
toxic dump
something,
that's
or-
down the block or
Right.
anything like that.
Same thing with the airports. I don't know
Air
where this came
safety,
from,
you know, people don't even barely ask what that is. That has to do with flight patterns of airplanes.
and
Bulk
bulk sales isn't important anymore. For a while there
No,
was,
well, the airport thing only came in
Yeah.
a couple of years ago. It's ridiculous.
yeah.
Bulk
In my
sales,
Not important, Patty. Yeah,
something
you
you'll
keep
never
going.
come across. Notice the buyer's insurance. They need insurance. That's all it means is they have to have a year policy before they close on the house. Maintenance and condition. The seller agrees to keep the house in the condition at which the buyers bought it. They can't let the grass grow 10 feet tall after they sell their house or ignore anything that needs to be
Well, it's
maintained.
funny that Carolee just said about grass because often in the fall, you get people who say, "Oh, Carolee, I canceled my landscaper. I'm not gonna, the
Yeah.
leaves are this high on their lawn right before the closing of Halloween, and they don't want to take the leaves off." Of course, that doesn't go over too well with the buyer often, So
The seller's
that's sometimes
required.
stuff you have to talk about it with the people, buyers and
The
sellers.
seller should continue to maintain the property as if they're living there,
Right.
obviously.
Funny things happen. People get sometimes cheap right before the closing.
Everybody is entitled to a walkthrough before the closing. So that's just something you should make your a seller aware of, and your buyer, and the house should be broom swept clean when you do the walkthrough. Adjustments at closing just speaks about if you close in the middle of the month, the taxes, if there's association dues on a condo, any of those expenses, they get split on a per diem basis.
All that you need to really know is what Carolee just said, guys. It's the seller pays up until the day of the closing, and the buyer picks up all the expenses from the day of the closing. So nobody pays somebody else's bills because they're always worried about when the utilities stop or when the taxes stop or start. So that's what we really need
The
to know.
next paragraph, failure or buyer seller to close, that has to do with legal action if somebody doesn't close once all the contingencies are met.
Yeah, most of
And
these
that's a rare thing that you're going to get into.
most of these paragraph guys are for the lawyers, and you're probably not going to be asked about it. So I wouldn't be too worried about it.
This is consumer information statement. This is just saying that Randy Douglas is the realtor that's representing, well, in this case, he's a disclosed dual agent. So he's representing the seller and the buyer. So if it wasn't him, it would be another agency, and that's where you would fill that in. And down at this bottom part, it says brokers information and commissions. And again, you would fill in, if it wasn't both Keller Williams, if it was another realtor who listed it, you would go into the MLS, go to the roster and look up all their information. Down in participating, the commission, generally, I don't necessarily put the commission in where it says participating firm. If you represent the buyer, I just put per listing agreement.
Yeah, you can see on line 576, guys, that just pre-printed in for a listing agreement. We
Yes.
don't like to, if you're selling a friend or not a friend or somebody you just met yesterday, for 30 years, we don't like to throw out the money that you may earn if this closes. So we just think it's more private if you put per listing agreement. You don't have to put 2.5% or 4% or whatever you're making. If you put 2.5% of 600,000, we don't personally want people to calculate in their heads. Oh yeah, that's I don't know, whatever that is. $12,500. So we just put per listing agreement. That's perfectly acceptable. Keeps all the information private about what you may or may not make on this.
And Randy, you might not know what the listing agent is going to get.
You hardly ever know until the closing. And
But even on the selling part, we just usually put per listing.
I should have asked about this. Is anybody online here, Patty, that's one of our New York agents? Because this is totally.
I don't think so.
That's a whole nother thing. We'll talk about that if any of you guys become New York agents.
But I see you leave the commission due participating firm, which is the buyer's side. You leave that blank.
Well, we usually put per listing agreement. I don't know why it's not there. It's
we
Randy's.
were nervous and in a rush, Patty, to get it done, so we
Okay.
couldn't fill that out. But it's
Oh,
not the end
did
of the
it
world.
again. But this time I don't have the thing in the way.
Okay, that's okay. You got it. And then what's after that?
Equitable lien.
Yeah, that stuff is, this is all lawyers, legalese that they added to the contract over the years. Patty can probably remember the day when the contract was 1 or 2 pages. So,
This is important. Disclosure that the buyer or seller has a real estate license. If the buyer is if you're buying something for yourself, you have to disclose that you have a real estate license. So, or if you're selling whatever. So that's something you have to disclose. Broker,
attorney review, guys, that's the clause that we talked about before. Maybe Carol wants to go over that real quickly. It's 3 business days, but
we don't know. Well, I don't know why this is at the end of the contract, because of course it happens in the beginning, but that's so typical. When you present an offer to the listing agent of your contract, we'll talk about what to do with that. But when you present it to the listing agent and they present it to the seller, generally they'll give you a counter offer. They'll come back. Once you agree and everybody has agreed to the price and the general terms, then everybody signs the contract, and then it gets sent to the buyer's and seller's attorney. And then the review period starts once the attorney has the signed contract in their hands. And that 3-day attorney review period allows the 2 attorneys to draw up a rider, make any adjustments to the contract. If there's any mistakes made in the contract, somebody's name is spelled wrong, or they just want to change some of the terms of the contract, they make up a rider, and that goes back and forth between the attorneys until they both sign off on it.
And you can imagine right now how busy they are and how it's imperative that you're dealing with an attorney who makes most of his or her living doing real estate.
Very good point. Somebody who you want to make sure that their buyer, if they have their own attorney and it happens to be their uncle or whatever, that they're familiar with New Jersey real estate law, because it really matters, particularly now when you want to get in and out of attorney review so you don't have further competition. So once that 3-day attorney review period, and sometimes attorney review is done in 2 days. If the attorneys are really on top of it, they send a rider out that the other one agrees with, they'll sign off, and it can be done sooner. But they have 3 days to review the contract and to come to an agreement among themselves. So once that's over, then you're considered under contract, and that's when then you move forward with your home inspections, and the clock starts ticking at the end of attorney review.
Guys, while you're in attorney review, owner can still consider offers, and you're still at the risk for your buyer, and you can educate them. They could still possibly get bumped out if somebody comes in with another contract, especially if it's more money. So just be aware. That's why what Carol is saying, you want to get, if possible, in and out of attorney review as quickly as possible. And if you have an attorney that's a good real estate attorney and they're on the side of the buyer or the seller, they're going to move to get out of an attorney review quickly. I know it closes the door on other offers, which in this market, where sometimes there's 2, 3, 4, 8 offers on a property, you want to get out of review as quickly as you can and be under contract. Then they cut off the risk of being pushed out by some other buyer.
In your experience, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
In your experience, how fast have you guys gotten out of attorney review? Like
sometimes if you really know everybody the same day.
Oh, wow.
But you really you have to know the attorneys, and you have to have your buyer geared for that and understanding why we want to get out, because if there's 8 offers and you win, I hate to even use the word bidding, but if you win the bid and get the house, and somebody else wakes up the next morning that is 20 grand below you, and they say, oh, honey, let's offer 30 grand more because I got to have that house that's near my sister's house. And they contact their agent, and who contacts the attorney for the seller. And all of a sudden, now the seller is partway through attorney review, and now they can get 20 grand more in their pocket. It makes it really a lot of tense situations for all parties involved, because you can run the risk of getting bumped out. So you'd like your buyer to be able to call his or her attorney and say, Miss or Mr. Attorney, I need to get out of review right away, because I think there's possible that somebody could bump us out, and I really want this house because I grew up in this town, or whatever the reason is. We love it, and we got to have it. So you get out of review quickly, but typically that doesn't happen in one day. But Carolee and I have been able to do that.
Well, if you get to work with an attorney that you know and you work with well, there's been times that we might call and say to the attorney, look, this is a really hot house. We'd like to get out of review today if we can. And they'll, they can't always, but if they can, they'll do that because they understand the urgency of that as well.
You have to have a willing attorney, Leslie, on the other side too, for the
Right.
seller, not just the buyer.
Right.
They have to agree. Usually they almost always, they can have a rider. Like I said before, kidding around, it could be a couple paragraphs or it could be 20 pages. So they have to agree on the rider. Everybody signs it, reviews over, you go under contract.
And a seller's attorney might intentionally drag their heels if they think there might be another offer coming in for their client. So you don't have total control of how quickly that can go. If you work with an attorney who does a lot of real estate, a lot of them know each other, and that kind of cements the deal too. They're more likely not to just dump your deal if they've already spoken to the attorney and feel some commitment toward the people. So it's good to get some professional relationships. And if you don't know people when you're doing that, you can ask one of us or ask anybody who's the good attorneys. We have a preferred attorney list at Keller Williams that we recommend. So, those are attorneys that do real estate all the time, that understand the market and are on top of the situation, and they know what needs to be done.
Will there ever be a situation where can an attorney work on both sides or no?
No.
Okay.
That's a conflict.
I don't know if they can legally, but most attorneys will not do that.
I believe they can,
It's not ethical.
They don't want to represent both. In law school, they tell them not to do that. And just like they tell attorneys not to represent themselves when they're trained in their own legal matters too. I forget what the catchphrase is in law school about
Well,
it.
we've referred attorneys and they say, unfortunately, I can't represent your buyer because I'm on the other side.
Yeah.
Okay.
So most time, I've never seen one that will represent.
They don't want to legally. It's a no-no.
I figured, but the littlest thing surprised me these days, so I figured I'd ask.
It's funny that you said that. I just had a sale the other day, and I recommend a local attorney that we use often, and then I represent the buyer. Then the agent for the seller said, "Oh, that's who my seller was going to use because she closed with her 8 years ago." So all of a sudden, then they switched out, and I kind of won the attorney war there. That I got the attorney they wanted, but they found a compatible attorney for the other party. But sometimes it happens where some of these attorneys there's probably a dozen popular real estate attorneys in Bergen County or more. We know, the preferred list Patty's referencing has several on it, probably half a dozen or more that are good real estate attorneys, and they specialize in real estate. So that's what you want.
And also,
Now, can you speak to the addendums before we call it an evening?
I know it's getting a little later, Patty, but we can hang here if you guys need to. The addendums are basically applying if you have this contract's good for any kind of property.
So
guys, pretty
in
much.
this particular one, lead paint should be checked, and it's not. So, that's just an oversight on probably our admin's part. But
it's not the end of the world if you don't check a box here, but it should come up in attorney review.
the first one is obviously a buyer sale contingency. Most people are not taking those today, but if the contract was subject to your buyer selling their house, those boxes should be checked. And then there's a separate addendum. Most of these have separate addendums. So you're just saying these are the ones that apply, and you attach like the lead paint addendum, for instance. Coronavirus, that's just the sign off of Corona, right?
Yeah, it's not unusual that these don't get, I know I'm the broker and there maybe some are supposed to be checked, but it's not unusual that they go unchecked and it's addressed in the in attorney review. For example, underground oil tank. I don't believe this property has underground oil tank, but it has gas heat and it's an old furnace, so we didn't check the box. But that's something that Carol Lee mentioned before. It's become pretty standard for, at least we recommend it, for a buyer to spend the extra $250 for an oil tank sweep. These are handy to check. It's more kind of a checklist for the attorneys and everybody to go over before they finish their rider. But obviously you would know if it's new construction, if it's private sewage, that should be on the listing within MLS. The private well, that should be in MLS, notified by the listing agent. A short sale, that should be the listing agent telling you it's a possible short sale. A swimming pool, I guess we could just look in the backyard and see if it has a swimming pool, but that would be part of the home inspection process that you'd have. So
if the house had a swimming pool, technically you should be checking that box, and then there should be a separate inspection rider, so to speak, or addenda, so that mentions swimming pool. So that's basically what that is.
The more complete that section is, guys, probably the better. But if you miss something like I did, I think we're okay.
He failed the list.
As Patty says, you might go to real estate jail. But I don't think you go to real estate jail over this particular
And
item.
then the last thing, additional contractual provisions, that's if you want to put in there something like I said before. A purchaser is doing inspections for environmental, structural, and safety issues only. Something additional that you want to add, or
you might put, if you have a funny situation which comes up once in a while, like a person's transferred to the area, it's the wife looking at the house only and the husband's in Chicago, and maybe you want to ask the owner, hey, I need 2 days to get the owner, the other party within the couple out here. They need 2 days. So that you might not get that granted, but that's where you could write those kind of things.
You would put like subject
in
to
there.
the so-and-so John Doe seeing the house in 3 days or something, if that were the case, which would be rare. But so that's
Well,
what
I'll
that's
tell you,
for.
it's not, as the broker, I see a lot of things that Carol Lee does too, but one of our agents has had a situation the other day where people bought the property sight unseen, and when they saw it,
But I
it
can
didn't look
tell
as
you
good as it did in FaceTime.
what
so
I can
they
tell
backed
you
out.
as a listing agent, I don't like accepting a contract from somebody who hasn't seen the house. Like we've had offers
Yeah.
where the wife saw the house and they said, oh, the husband will be fine. I'm not really that comfortable with that. I mean, depending on the circumstances, because we've had it happen too often that the spouse comes and then they don't want it. So, we obviously.
That's where you would write unusual things that aren't covered in the other 13 pages of the contract. So usually there's not much written in there. If you have a sentence or two, that would be.
That might be where you
common.
write something about a seller's concession, but we don't want to get into all of that. So once you prepare this contract, you're going to put a package together. You're going to get your buyer to sign the contract, to sign the lead paint disclosure, to sign the seller's disclosure, to make sure he's already signed a COVID release, to have their pre-approval letter, and we're not.
Yep. MLS printout.
And make a packet and present that to the listing agent, and is what I like to do, with a little cover letter that says, thank you for all your help, because you've already talked to the listing agent now. Thank you for your help. Here is the offer on your listing at 123 Main Street from my buyer. And then I like to do the bullet points, very well qualified, good money down, nothing to sell, closing flexible, just so that when the agent gets the offer, it's easy for them to see all of the good points you're trying to sell your buyer.
That's back to the strategy thing, guys, not so much anything to do with writing and filling in the blanks.
And I'm sure that, some buyers want to write love letters to the homeowners.
Patty knows we're not supposed to do that, so we won't drag over that too much, but
Yeah.
The real
it's not
estate,
unusual.
Fair housing gets a little
the Real
nervous.
Estate Commission and Fair Housing has an issue because many people write a love letter, put pictures, and they're afraid that it's an opportunity for maybe discrimination. But, if your buyers, I have to tell you that almost all the buyers I've had said, can we write a letter to the owner? So if they do, I said, if you send it to me, I'll present it. And that's all you can do.
Or they can drop it off in the seller's mailbox or something. But does that address most of the things in the contract that you guys have questions about? Or maybe it's too confusing? I don't know. It's a lot of fast talking here. And
You went through it very quickly.
Has anybody written a contract yet? Or just starting?
But now they're going to feel a degree of comfort. I love your cover letter. I love your cover letter, which gives the bullet points, because picture it from the point of view of the seller and the listing agent. And maybe they're getting 7 offers, and it's got to be confusing for them.
It's particularly when there's a multiple offer situation. You want to make everything a nice, neat package.
That's a good package.
And on the front cover, particularly if you have a really strong offer, you want to put, like I just did one, and I put the price, the amount down, nothing to sell, flexible closing. And then I put a little personal information, like this couple grew up in town. They'd like to stay in town. They have family here. They're very committed to the property, that sort of thing. So it's kind of your opportunity to give one last presentation about your buyer and their strong points.
One strong point that we had in this particular contract, guys, was that the money was due the day after attorney review rather than 10 days after attorney review. So that would be one of the kind of strong points that it's helped make your case with another listing agent, that the people are qualified. Here's a pre-approval letter. The money's due on the 3rd day of attorney review or when attorney review ends. So, they're going to be bringing in this particular case, $60,000. in 3 days or the day attorney review ends. So it's making your case kind of summarizing, like we would strongly suggest you do that. Give a little summary, attaching all these documents that Carolee's writing.
And my buyer, because there are so many offers, said to me that he's putting 20% down, but he said, I can put down another $15,000. So I put that as a point that we put it in additional contractual provisions that in the event the appraisal comes up short, the buyer has the ability to put down another $15,000. So like anything that's going to make the seller feel comfortable about your buyer being a strong buyer.
Patty, is that how we doing, Patty? Good?
I think you guys did a phenomenal job.
Other
And
questions?
I have a suggestion for maybe another class.
Yeah.
If you could give the New York version of that, because I'm in the process of getting my New York license. And I'm surprised. I've come across at least 5 or 6 other people who are just like me. We've gotten a New York and a New Jersey.
Yeah,
Well, you'll be shocked that the New York is one page.
It's a very brief seminar, Dave. So
it's about a 15-minute.
We could certainly do that. In New York, it's a little bit different because the process, well, we won't get into that. We'll do a New York class.
It's reversed. We write really a one-page document and the attorneys write the whole contract. Here in New Jersey, we write the contract, but the attorney reviews it. So it's a little different, but we'd be happy to do that and schedule it through Patty and see if we can help everybody with any other information, guys. And Patty asks us sometimes to repeat this class. I think she's taping this one, but we do this once a month or every other month, whatever Patty schedules. This will be going on again. So, of course, you guys can ask any questions in between.
And just a reminder, Randy makes himself available every Friday. What time is it, Randy?
Chris and I are supposed to be available Fridays between, is it 12 and 1, Patty, or 11 and 12? I'm not sure.
It's not, I think it's 12 and 1.
It's on the schedule, guys, on the calendar.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And I have said this before, and for anybody that is interested, when it's the time to write your first contract and call the broker and all of that, don't hesitate to ask Patty, because you're not going to remember all of this, or maybe you just don't know how to say it, or what's the best approach. So,
somebody that you came in with that you know in the company, they introduce you to Keller Williams. If they're experienced agent, they may be a good source to do that. So I wouldn't hesitate to ask somebody for some help for at least your first few contracts. And then,
I mean, Patty's available to you. If you have questions for us, feel free to call us. We're happy to try to walk you through it if you need to, or any agent that's been around in the company will be willing to help you.
Thank you. I do have a question, because now curiosity is killing me. Okay. What are the bulk sales?
What are
the bulk sale that Patty skipped over?
Okay, yeah. Patty, go to the bulk sales, Patty. See that? You skipped over the important
bulk sales. For a while there, that put everybody's knickers in a knot.
Actually, Lisa, and a lot of people, including attorneys, didn't really understand that. It was it's kind of just what the word says. I believe it's a bulk. We'll read it together. It's a bulk sale of properties. Like if you have a big development.
Okay.
Not happening too much in New Jersey, unless you go like the South Central Jersey retirement communities, stuff like that.
That's what it's.
So that still falls under residential versus commercial, I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not finding it.
As soon as I say this,
there we go.
You'll encounter it, but it pretty much is something that you're never going to encounter. Like a lot of things in real estate school, are probably not going to encounter a lot of these things.
It has to do with the tax forms that are required for bulk sales. I can't honestly, I've been doing this 37
No, that's a good
years.
explanation what Carolee said. That's kind of the nutshell thing. It's really.
And I don't think I've ever used it ever. So, so not having read over it, but it has to do with the tax forms that were required in a bulk sale situation. So it's really nothing that you need to know about or even understand.
Yeah, let the attorneys handle it.
So like if a condo development's going up on one or two tracts of land, the attorneys would deal with it?
Yeah, then we would check the box maybe on that last signature page, Lisa, where you had condo addendum and so forth, or new construction. New construction and condos, new construction particularly where houses aren't even built yet, often calls for a much longer contract drawn up by the builder's attorney, spelling out all the house specs. And Carol Lee used to do tons of new construction, probably 50 new houses in the area. It's kind of phased out a little bit because it's 99% built up around here. But yeah, anything like that's going to be a much longer contract than drawn out with the attorneys for new construction. Condos, there's a condo addendum that Carol Lee mentioned, which is a 1-page or 2-page document that would be attached. Basically, it's just saying that the seller says, yeah, the maintenance fee is $450 and there's no assessments. But that's kind of what the condo addendum is. So lots of these things are more towards the attorneys, but they're in the contract. Attorneys, Patty can tell you, made up this contract with the Realtor Association, but it was the longest lawsuit in New Jersey, 18 years between the Bar Association and the Realtors about this particular contract, which used to be, honestly, I won't tell you how long we're in real estate, but it used to be a 1-page contract.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
13 pages. So, and it took 18 years of lawsuit between the Bar Association and the Realtors. So you can see why it's so long. And it always seems to get longer too.
So the attorneys took a year and a half or whatever, or 2 years, whatever.
18 years.
Oh, 18, whatever it was, to allow us to draw contracts, and then they do riders anyway. So it's
wow.
They basically override what we do because
Okay, great.
And
Thank you so much.
The realtors fought for the right to do that is because we used to draw, as they do in New York, a binder, and we would come to an agreement on a 1-page binder. And then what would happen is we would wait for the attorneys to draw the contract. And many times they, it wasn't their top priority as it is ours. And so they would sit on their desk and then there'd be other offers and people would lose houses. And so the realtors fought for the right to draw the contract. So it took years and years for them to agree on the language. And as you can see, there's a lot of it that doesn't apply because it's for the whole state of New Jersey. So like the airport, the airlines, that doesn't really affect us like it does maybe the people who live near Newark Airport, so
right.
It's really kind of a broad contract that not
all right, just covers everything just in case.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about the contract in general?
No, that was a lot. Very informative. Thank you so much.
Okay, I know we talked fast.
It's a lot to cover, so I'm sure, and we talk fast, so trying to help Patty, because sometimes we drag over 2 pages. In the beginning, in 45 minutes, we never get to Patty's other 12 pages. So.
No, that's fine. Will you send a copy to us, Patty?
Because this is a real contract, no.
Okay.
Well,
the names are X'd out, Patty, but if you don't want to.
Well, there's some mistakes in this one, so maybe we better send you a better one.
There are blank contracts in
Command.
In Command, okay.
DocuSign yet, but there's blank contracts that are filled out with kind of like where to put the seller's name, where to put the buyer's name. They're educational. They're not real contracts, but it tells you where to put the numbers. And like we said, page 2 and 3 are where most things are written.
Yeah.
So that's kind of pretty instructional. I think, does Joanne have the contracts on YouTube also, Patty, or just in
on kwvalley.info, there are recordings on how to do this.
Okay.
And we usually suggest print out a contract and, as if you're buying a house, pick a listing and use yourself as a buyer and fill it out. And then if you have questions, we can always do like a follow-up class about contracts after you do that.
If you can't sleep at night, that'll make it go out right away if you read the contract.
Will we have your cover page that you spoke about earlier? Is that on Command also? The checklist?
No, that's
the first page, Lisa, is the
you mean what I spoke about?
No.
Yes.
The summary page.
Yeah,
okay.
That's just really a letter to the, every situation is a little bit different. But that's just really kind of
covers the bullet points of how you want to make your presentation to the other listing agent.
But again, if you're making an offer and you have questions about any of this, because what we didn't talk about is strategy about calling the agent and talking to them about how many offers they have and how are they going to.
That's a whole nother.
How are they going to handle a multiple offer situation? Are you going to do final invest? Do you have usually it's like final invest by tomorrow at 5 o'clock. What is your seller looking for as far as closing? That's when you would get into all that strategy. And that's when you would maybe guide your buyer, because if there's particularly the house I had recently, there were 7 offers. Now, it's going way over the price. So those are the kind of things that the more information you can get from the listing agent, the better chance that you'll have to prepare your buyer to do all the right things.
Okay.
Lisa, the biggest thing towards any strategy or education would be probably if you're doing that kind of class would be that you want to educate your buyer to what's out there in the market and what's happening. And your buyer is going to educate you to, hey, our bedroom set's this big, or we have a dog, we need a fenced yard, or we have children, we want a side street. So the share of educating each other. But by doing that, you want your buyer to like you and trust you. The more they like you and trust you, the better they're going to grasp quickly what they need to do to get a deal. When you say, hey, we need to shorten the home inspection, it can't be 2 weeks, it has to be 3 days. Or you have to bring the money in now rather than 2 weeks. If they like you and trust you and feel confident that you're professional, giving them good advice, which I'm sure all you folks would do, you want to make sure they understand they need to trust you, your experience, even though you're new. You're doing education that they don't already know about. So you're educating them what Carol said, how to win a house in this kind of market. And the sooner that they feel comfortable with you, like you, and trust you, the better, quicker decisions you can help them make to get them a house.
Okay. Great. Thank you for all this.
And again,
So earning their trust
if you have questions, talk to Patty, or call one of us, or, I mean, that's what we're here for. So that's the Keller Williams way.
You have gone above and beyond. Thank you.
I hope that was helpful, guys, to you.
It was
You probably
excellent.
sleep better tonight, right? I don't know.